morning, so we'll get started into the call if that's okay. So the plan for this morning is to take you through the UK Share Prosperity Fund and what we're planning to do in Edinburgh. So we've done our introductions and the housekeeping, so as I say, cameras and microphones are switched off just to help the bandwidth, but do use the chat function if you need to ask any questions as we go along. So I'll give you a quick overview in terms of what Share Prosperity Fund is all about to start off with, and what we're planning to do in Edinburgh. And we'll also go through what the timescales are for implementing the Share Prosperity Fund in Edinburgh. And after we've gone through the logistics of what's happening with things, then we'll get a chance for questions and answers at the end. And I think someone just asked a question about whether we'll share the slides. So yes, we're going to share the slides afterwards as well. What we will hope to do is put them up on the website, so folk can then download the slides from there as well. And we're also recording the call today as well, so hopefully then it can be shared with anyone who's not able to join the call this morning as well. So hopefully there'll be plenty of options for people to find out what's happening. And as I say, we've got a question and answer session at the end, and what we'll try and do is create a question and answer document as well. So that way, if we can kind of collate together the common questions that people might have about what's happening, we'll collate that into a document and again put that on the website so people can access that as we go along, and we'll keep that updated with other questions that might come in as well. We've set up a generic email address so that people can get in touch with us with any questions, and so we'll give you that at the end of the call today as well, so you can get in touch that way too. So hopefully plenty of options to get any questions answered. So that's our plan for the call this morning. So moving into firstly what the Share Prosperity Fund is all about. So as you may have heard, there is quite a significant amount of funding coming from UK government for UK Share Prosperity Fund. And the idea behind that is it's really a follow-on from what was the pilot of the Community Renewal Fund, which has also been put in place as a result of the ending of the European structural funding. So significant amount of funding coming forward from UK government, 2.6 billion to support local investment up until the end of March 2025. So that's the timescales we're working within. So earlier this year in April, there was a prospectus published by UK government setting out what their plans were and how they wanted to invest and what the exit plans were from the European structural funding. So you'll see it's been split into target areas, and you'll see there's 4 different target areas as part of the funding. So the first one there we have is communities in place, second one business support, third one people and skills, and then the fourth one multiply. So what we're really looking at today is the first 3 of those in terms of the investment plan that will be created. And the fourth one, multiply, is being led by the Community Learning Development team within the council. That will still be part of the investment plan, but it'll be led by their team. So I say today's focus is really about how we are looking at the other 3 target priorities for the funding and how that will be delivered. So that's the plan for this morning's session. So in terms of the numbers and what kind of amount of funding is involved for Edinburgh, you'll see that's the overall amount of funding there, 175 million in terms of the core, 36.6 million for multiply, and part of that is spent on capital costs. So you'll see there in terms of how that translates to Edinburgh's allocation, for the first financial year of the funding, we'll have 1.99 million almost total in funding there. Moves up to 3.2 million in year 2, and then 7.3 million almost in year 3. So you'll see there's that kind of staged amount of funding that's coming forward. So a total of almost 12.4 million for all parts of the programme. And you'll see the split there in terms of how the revenue and capital split for the funding we're looking at today. And you'll see also the allocation that's been made for multiply. So as I said, the multiply part, that's been managed by Community Learning Development within the council, and today we're looking at how we can develop the investment plan for the remaining funding as part of Share Prosperity Fund. So that's the plan. So in terms of how we're looking to invest that funding, in terms of the core funding there for Share Prosperity Fund, we're looking for proposals, and the timescale is very short. UK government have asked that they get investment plans back for the 1st of August. That's their target date for funding and for the investment plans. So that's the request from UK government. So to meet that timescale, what we're looking for is proposals to come back to us by the 11th of July this year. And we've got an email address, as I said at the start, that's been set up for returning those proposals. So in terms of that proposal, what we need in terms of information, it's made up of 3 parts. The first part is an application form, so that goes into details of who the organisation is that's applying for the funding, what the details of what they're looking to have funded, and the various different other requirements that might be needed as part of the proposal in terms of meeting things like qualities, risk, and the various different other parts that go with the application. Then there's 2 other parts that go with it as well. The first one is about the expenditure, and that's been split down into capital and revenue into the separate financial years, and also in terms of the different interventions that are involved. And I'll come on to some of the specific interventions shortly in terms of presentation. So there's a spreadsheet that goes with that part of it, and then there's a second spreadsheet to look at the outcomes and outputs that you'd want to achieve as part of the funding. So that's again broken down into the interventions and over the financial years, so that it's actually broken down throughout the funding. In terms of the funding, as I say, it's over 3 financial years, so they just want to see a breakdown in terms of UK government as to how that will be spent for each financial year, but there's flexibility in terms of that proposal you're putting forward to fit the timescales of when you want to deliver. Obviously, you'll see that we've got a small amount of funding for this financial year, up until the end of March, and then it grows for the second 2 financial years. So as I say, there's flexibility in terms of that proposal you want to put forward and how you want to fund what you want to deliver. So there's flexibility in that. But what I would say, anybody that's applying for funding for this financial year will need to be at a fairly advanced stage in terms of what they want to deliver, because we will need to have that funding spent before the end of March this year. So that's the 3 parts of the actual application. And then there's a guidance document that goes along with that as well. So you'll be able to actually download that guidance document from our website. So hopefully you would have been on the website when you were registering for this call today. I think maybe Vicky, do you want to add the link on the chat for people so they can access the website? So you'll be able to then download the proposal form from there, and also the 2 spreadsheets and the guidance documents. So that's all available on the website, and as I say, we'll put on the question answers and the slides, and hopefully the recording up there as well, so you can access those there too. So that's the parts that are required. So in terms of what we're actually looking to fund, as I said, there's 3 different investment priorities for the Share Prosperity Fund that the UK government have set. First one there, communities in place. Second, support for business, and third, people and skills. So what we're really looking for is people to identify projects that will clearly align with those investment priorities, but there's also a list of interventions that breaks down those priorities into specifics of what UK government are looking for. So I would recommend that you look, and the link's there in the presentation, I would look at that intervention list before you start preparing your application, and that will give you a good idea of what is and isn't appropriate for this funding. It's also then broken further down now to outcomes and outputs as well. So it gives quite clear details of what interventions UK government are looking to fund, but also what outcomes and outputs they're expecting for that funding as well. So it's quite a lot of detail in there that will hopefully help with anyone that's thinking of pulling together a proposal and an application for us. Okay. Alongside that, we also want the investment plan to fit in with our local priorities. So we're looking for it to fit in with the Edinburgh Partnership and the Local Outcome Improvement Plan. So it's fitting with the priorities there. So you'll see the 3 priorities that has been set by Edinburgh Partnership. So we've got enough money to live on, access to work, learning and training opportunities, and Edinburgh being a good place to live. And that also ties in with the Council's business plan about ending poverty by 2030, becoming a net zero city, and also supporting wellbeing and equalities. So I think those plans in terms of local priorities fit well with the priorities that have been set by Share Prosperity Fund. So I think they do tie well together, and I think it's very much kind of complementary. And I do think the intervention list that UK government has set for it is fairly wide-ranging, so I would hope that anybody that has an idea or proposal would fit in with that intervention list that's been set by UK government. Okay, I think there was a question in the chat that popped up there about what an intervention was. So I'd say I would go on to that link there from the UK government's website, and you'll be able to find the full details in terms of what all the different interventions are that UK government have set in the different priorities as part of that list there. So we can have a look at that document. It's quite helpful to get an idea of what's involved. Okay. So in terms of any proposals that have been developed, as I said, for this financial year, if you have an idea that wants funding this year, it will need to be at a fairly advanced stage and fairly well developed, because it needs to be spent before the end of this financial year. In terms of the future years, obviously it's quite difficult to predict into the next couple of years, but it's not that far away. So we're still looking for a reasonable amount of detail of what you want to fund so that we can include that within the investment plan that's clear about what you want to deliver. So within that proposal, we're looking for you to tell us who will actually deliver the proposal. This is open to both public sector, private sector, constituted organisations. So there's clear details in the guidance as to who can apply for the funding. We're looking for you to tell us what will be delivered. So we've got a summary asking for just a kind of snapshot of what's going to be delivered in terms of description, but also clearer details as well in terms of what will be delivered within the proposal. And also we want you to tell us why you think it fits with the priorities for the funding. So that's where we're asking you to really look at that intervention list, look at what the local priorities are and tell us how your proposal fits with those priorities. As I said, it's over 3 financial years, so if you can tell us when it will be delivered and break it down into those 3 financial years, we need to translate what you want to deliver into that investment plan, so it'll be helpful for us to have a clear breakdown for that. And also, as I said, it's not long until the end of March 2025. It will be here before we know it. So it would be important to have exit plans in place. So although we're asking for revenue funding applications here, we want to see how that is going to be sustainable beyond March 2025. In terms of UK Government's plans for beyond March 2025, we have asked the question, and at the moment the response is it's too early to say what the intentions are for beyond Shared Prosperity Fund after March 2025. So I would treat it very much as the fund will end at the end of March 2025 at this stage, and not anticipate any particular continuation. And that's certainly the messages we're getting from UK Government at the moment. Certainly they are hoping that a lot of the delivery will be sustained beyond the funding, and this is about kind of an intervention up until the end of March 2025, and then it will be sustainable itself after that. But as I say, that's the intention. So in terms of writing your proposals, I would write it on that basis. In terms of the spreadsheets and what we're looking for there, as I said, it needs to have clearly costed plans, and those need to be linked to the intended interventions. So as I said, split down into the interventions, but also over the financial years in terms of when that spend is going to happen. And it's the same in terms of the spreadsheet for the outcomes and outputs. You need clearly measurable and achievable outcomes and outputs. What I would say is don't overstretch what you want to try and achieve just because you think it will help you get the funding. If it doesn't look realistic, that's probably not particularly helpful in terms of proposal. So I would make sure it's as achievable and realistic as possible. We're intending for this to be very much a negotiated process. So anyone that will be included in the investment plan, we will be speaking to them about including them in the investment plan. So it may be that the proposal that's put forward is not the final proposal that actually gets included in the investment plan. We've got to try and take into account all 3 different priorities for the Shared Prosperity Fund in terms of the funding. So we need to actually have a good range of different proposals that will then contribute to that overall investment plan. So to achieve that, it will be a negotiated process with partners. So as I say, we're starting this proposal process to get ideas from those that would like to achieve funding from Shared Prosperity Fund, but we will need to negotiate that to come up with the final investment plan. And in terms of how we will do that, it will be through an assessment panel that will be made up of stakeholders that are delivering in Edinburgh to actually assess those proposals that come in after the 11th of July. So we've got quite a short window to actually turn this around in terms of the funding coming in. I think there's a couple of questions popped up there just now to see if I can see them again at this stage. So I think there was a question there about there's a question there from Claire. Our proposals need to go to UK Government. Is this an EOL process? I'm not very sure if I know what an EOL process is. Can you maybe enlighten me, Claire, as to what you mean? And we'll come on to Norrie's question. So do applicants need to apply for 3 years, or will 2 years from 2023 be accepted? So what we're saying is there's flexibility over the 3 financial years. So if you want to deliver just in 2024, that's fine. as long as it's clear in your proposal what the dates of delivery are and broken down, then that is fine. We're not expecting people to deliver for the full 3 years. It will be very much dependent on what your proposal is and how you want it delivered. Obviously, in the first year, we've got a smaller pot of funding, and it increases for the second and third year. So there will, as I say, it will be a negotiated process. So it might be that we have to come back and speak to people about the proposals in terms of the dates they plan to deliver if we need to try and manage that within the investment plan. So it will be flexible in terms of those dates. There's also a question about what sort of capital costs are allowed. So I'd say in terms of the capital costs, I would have a look at the intervention list, and that will give you a clear idea of what is eligible for funding and give you an idea of what kind of costs might be acceptable. So I'd have a look at that, and then if there's any questions following that, then do come back to us. I'll try to keep up the questions here. So where have we got to? Expression of interest. So what we're asking for in terms of this is we're asking for proposals for the Edinburgh process. And what UK government will do is they will then consider our investment plan. We have obviously got an allocation of funding, so we're not bidding competitively for the funding. We've been told how much funding Edinburgh's getting. And the idea is the investment plan will go forward to UK government, and they will then come back to us and either ask for us to amend or approve our investment plan. So it will be a negotiated process with UK government as well. And I'll come on to timeline for the process for that as well. So hopefully that answers your question, Claire. Question from Nori, can management costs contribution towards overhead be included? Yes, that is allowed in terms of delivery if you need contribution towards management costs. I would just say in terms of any proposals you're putting forward in terms of management costs, ensure that they are reasonable in terms of the cost of the proposal that's coming in, because if not, they might be questioned and might need to negotiate that. In terms of the management costs that UK government are passing on to the council for managing this, they are given a 4% management cost for the funding, but appreciate that some projects may have higher management costs, but that's the rate that UK government have set for the council to manage this pot of funding. Question there about how many projects are the council looking to fund in each of the 3 priorities? Well, it really depends on the size of the projects that we get put forward. There's not a minimum or maximum value that we've set for projects, so it really is about having a kind of well-balanced investment plan. So we're really looking to have a spread across all 3 of the investment priorities. So we're not really looking at a specific kind of target number of projects, but as I say, we just want to have a range of proposals that would fit into the investment plan. So it's not really a target there. And as I say, the minimum maximum value, because there's a range of different type of projects that can be funded, we've not set a minimum maximum project value. We'll just really be looking at proposals that offer value for money and fit well with the investment plan and the priorities. So it's a question there about dates need to be available for discussion with the panel. So as I say, I'll come on to the timeline further on, and that might give you an idea in terms of when we're likely to be in touch with organisations for that negotiated process. And yes, you're right, it's now the 11th of July is the deadline, so there's not long for people to develop proposals and submit them. So I appreciate that's a very, very short timescale, but the frustration is we need to get our plans approved and with UK government within their timelines. So we're just working within the timelines they've set, unfortunately. So apologies in advance for the extremely short and tight timescale. Question there from Mayan about whether the government will assess any of these applications. What the government will assess is actually just the investment plan itself. So they'll be looking at what we put forward, so they won't be actually assessing specific applications. So it's not the same as what the process was for the Community Renewal Fund this time. As I say, it's an allocation and an investment plan. So we will put forward that investment plan to UK government, and they will come back and either ask us to amend that investment plan or approve the plan. I think I've answered your question, Margaret, about whether there's lower and upper amount for funding. So we've not set any limits on that because there's such a range of type of applications that we could receive for the funding. So there's no lower and upper limit. Question there from John about we have at least 2 proposals, both related to place-based community work. Would you recommend we submit 2 applications or have both ideas represented in one community application? What I would probably recommend is probably combining those into one application, because it wouldn't really necessarily make any difference in terms of the funding, whether it would or wouldn't be approved, because we would have a negotiated process anyway. So I would say there wouldn't be any harm in just putting it into one proposal if you felt that's most appropriate. But we'll leave that for yourself to decide once you've had a look at the paperwork and things. But yeah, happy for it just to be all combined into one proposal. So it's a question there from Nori about proposals needing to be at an advanced stage. So really what we're expecting for anything that needs to be funded between now until the end of March, it needs to be something that's going to be achievable and deliverable. So as we're already into the end of June, almost into July, then anything that needs to be funded for this financial year will need to be very much kind of ready to go as part of that proposal. So that obviously will be quite a challenge to have anything funded and in place. As I say, I'll come on to timescale for when we're expecting to hear back from UK government. But as I say, that's what we're meaning by at an advanced stage. So hopefully that answers that question, Nori. So Zoe's asking a question there about intervention list. It doesn't mention if salaries can be covered. Yes, that is fine to cover salaries as part of that. I say it's just about what is needed to deliver those interventions. So existing roles and salaries are okay as long as there's no duplication with any other funding. We've asked that question in terms of anything that is existing that's currently being delivered and whether that can be funded, and UK government are happy to fund existing delivery as long as it's showing how this will bring added value going forward. So a question there from Tanya. So this funding is specifically for Edinburgh. So we are looking at what the other local authorities are delivering within the region to make sure what we're delivering is actually complementing that delivery, but the investment plan that we are developing is specifically just for Edinburgh delivery. So hopefully that helps clarify that this is just for Edinburgh, and any of the proposals we're looking for will just be to cover delivery in Edinburgh. I'm not sure if other local authorities are taking this similar process to Edinburgh. This is the way we've decided to do it as the fairest way to ensure that all our partners and stakeholders are able to actually be part of the process. So we've decided to go down this route so we can hear from partners as to what they want to deliver. But other local authorities may have taken a different approach as to what they want to deliver for their allocation of funding. So it'd be best to speak to each of the local authorities as to what their intentions are. So a question from Simon in terms of whether we'll consider other types of interventions or other outputs. What I would say is that there's quite an extensive list of interventions and outputs that UK government have provided. So I would hope that any proposals will be able to fit within those interventions. But obviously anything that is put forward will be considered on its merit in terms of inclusion in the investment plan and how it fits. But I would say if it's possible to fit within one of the interventions, that would kind of be favourable, because at the end of it, we've got to put it forward as an investment plan to UK government. So they'll be assessing that on the basis of those interventions. So that would be the advice that I would give in terms of that side of things. So yeah, question there from Martin about the 1,500 word limit for the description. Yes, I would say that bullet points and nice succinct bids will be definitely favourable in terms of the panel being able to read those, so that's fine, as long as there's enough detail there to actually cover what's actually been delivered. So don't just use the word count up for the sake of it. I would say just keep it clear and a good description there. Question there from Paul. Sounds similar to investment communities funding, but distributed by local authority. I'm not too sure the details about the investment community funding. And questions from Zara.
I think that that fund requires match funding, if I'm not mistaken. So while this fund, obviously, if you do have match funding, that would be very welcome, but there's no requirement.
Great, thanks, Elon. Any collaborations to happen with other local authorities for the wider regional investment plan? So you may be aware there was a lot of discussions about whether this would go forward for the region or whether it would be specifically just for Edinburgh. So the decision was taken that our investment plan would be specifically just for Edinburgh, but we are speaking to other partners within the region as well to make sure that whatever we're delivering in Edinburgh complements the wider regional prosperity framework, because obviously there'll be kind of an opportunity to kind of complement delivery across the region. So there may be elements of the plan in the future that are delivered on a regional basis, but the actual investment plan itself has been specifically written for the Edinburgh investment. So hopefully that helps clarify that. Yes, it's okay to submit more than one application. Now just bear in mind that we will have limited funding because there's going to be a lot of interest. So I would focus on what is achievable. And UK Government have said that match funding is not required for this, but obviously we are keen to see value for money. So if match funding is possible and achievable, then I would encourage that to be added in. There is specific space within the proposal and the spreadsheets to actually detail what match funding you've got to be able to add into the funding you're looking for your projects. I think we covered the bit already about whether it has to be for existing projects already. So the UK Government have come back and said that it can be for existing delivery that's want to be continued, and that's aimed at anything that's currently funded through European social funding, because this is obviously follow on from that. And obviously we're keen to kind of anything that is going to struggle to continue delivery, we want to see that being sustained if it's still required and still achieving what it wants to achieve. So it doesn't need to be specifically new projects, but it has to be very much kind of no duplication of funding. So there is guidance within that list as to what is and isn't possible for that side of things. So it's worth having a look at the details within the UK Government's website for that. On the expenditure form, asks for costs against each priority. So I would say if you can break that down into each of the specifics as to how the funding meets those priorities, then that will be how we have to break that down when we feed that back to UK Government as part of the investment plan. So that would be the best advice I can give on that. It might be easier to focus on one specific priority if that's easier, and then that way it's clearer as to how that's been achieved, and that maybe then keeps it simple in terms of measuring that in the future. And this question about informal feedback prior to final submission. I think given the timescales, that's going to be quite challenging. We obviously will try to be as helpful as possible. So if there are questions, we'll do what we can to respond to that. I wouldn't say we'd be able to particularly read through bids and then give feedback though prior to the closing date. What I would say is it will be, as I say, a negotiated process. So once we know what our priorities are from the proposals that we receive, we will be in discussions with those that have put in bids. So if we think there is merit in a bid, but maybe there's elements that are missing that we want to see changed or added, then we could have that discussion once we've agreed on those that are going to be funded as priorities. So there won't be, as I say, an opportunity to actually read through bids in advance, but we will be able to answer questions and negotiate once we've decided on the priorities. Question there from Tony, I think that's possibly been answered in terms of it is Edinburgh only, and I've spoken about how, yeah, that's got a note after that from Tony, yeah, that's fine. So it's a question there about coordinating applications with partners who might be putting applications for similar related interventions. So I suppose the only opportunity will be really for yourselves to speak to partners in advance, but also we will try and coordinate that as part of the bids that come in for the investment plan. So we'll be looking at how they're going to complement each other, so there's not duplication in terms of the proposals that are coming forward. So hopefully that helps for that. And there's a question there about whether the outcomes can be achieved after the end of the funded period. So I suspect UK Government will be asking us to very much detail the spend, outcomes and outputs on each of the financial years, and there will be an element of time after the end of each financial year to report back on that. But I would say that the outcomes and outputs would need to be achieved within the financial years of that funding, and we're not aware of any flexibility in that at the moment, unfortunately. And there's a question there from Zoe about how much to apply for. So again, for that one, there's no minimum maximum. It's very much dependent on what is value for money for the type of funding that is requested. Yes, Alex, we'll pick up your email for you on that one. And then there's a bit there from Patricia at DWP. Keen to see bids linked to job outcomes. And that will then obviously fit in with the interventions that have been set as part of the UK Government's interventions and the outcomes and outputs list. So hopefully I've got to the end of the questions now. I can move on. As I say, there'll be further opportunity for questions as we go along, but I was keen to just take those just now while they were coming up as part of that. So timeline. So the timeline for what we're looking to do, the deadline, as said, for submissions is 11th of July, and as I say before, apologies in advance that there's such a short time frame for managing this. You'll see that we need to get a committee to the council in terms of what the investment plan looks like. So that report needs to be written, proposals need to be assessed and put into a coherent investment plan before the 4th of August. So you'll understand why we've set such a tight timeline for actually achieving this. That plan then needs to go forward to UK government for them to consider. So we've set a timeline of the 12th of August. You may see in the UK government prospectus that they've set the 1st of August as their anticipated date, but that is just not achievable within our approval processes. So we've requested an extension for that, and our now target date is the 12th of August. So we've had approval from UK government for that date for submission. In terms of UK government's assessment of bids, they are looking for getting a decision back to those that have put forward investment plans by October 2022. What they have said is it will be a first come, first served basis for assessing investment plans. So if we manage to meet our timescale 12th of August, hopefully they will manage to meet the timescale of coming back to us in early to late October, hopefully. So you might be aware that Community Renewal Fund, the process for that was supposed to be decided by July, but there was then a delay and that didn't actually get approved until November. So we've asked the question as to whether there's likely to be a delay again, but UK government at the moment are saying that they're planning to stick to that October timeline. So fingers crossed we will manage to achieve that October timeline so that we can start spending for this financial year. Obviously, if the approval is later than that, then the delay is when we can start the spend. And we've already spoken to UK government about what the processes are going to be in terms of if we can't spend a lot of funding this year, do we get to carry forward or not? So we've not had a decision on that yet. So we just need to put in our investment plan on the basis of the funding that we've been allocated as much as possible. So that's our intention for that. And as I said before, the end period for the funding is March 2025, so anything beyond that period can't be funded, and it's not clear yet from UK government what the intentions are for any follow-on funding after that, or if there will at all be any funding after March 2025. So that's the timeline we're working towards. We'll move on to questions now. That's the generic email address we've got set up, so if there are questions after today's presentation, or if you read anything on any of the documents, then do feel free to send any questions there. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. So in terms of the chat questions there, where did we get to? So question, I think that was a question for Patricia, so hopefully you've picked up that question from Alex there, Patricia. So would partner activities start in October, meaning a 6-month period of spend? Yes, that's right. So we are not planning to start any spend until we've had approval for the investment plan from UK government. Obviously, we want to ensure that what we're putting forward in that investment plan is acceptable to UK government, so we can't start spend until after that has been approved. So in terms of successful applications, yes, the intention is to go to committee on the 4th of August with the intended investment plan. It may be that we have discussions with those that have put in bids before that committee report goes forward if we need to make any adjustments or amendments to anyone's proposals that's been included in that investment plan. So it's likely that we'll have those discussions over July and August. As soon as the closing date is passed, then we will be assessing the bids as part of a panel, and once the panel is considered, that we'll start speaking to organisations. In terms of the funding is coming down to the local authority, and it's been funded in advance. So what will happen is once the investment plan is signed off by UK government, that funding will come to local authority, and then we will be able to pass that funding on to those that have had successful bids as part of the process. So as I say, it's a slightly different setup to what was previously the case with structural funds, where the funding was claimed in arrears. This time, the funding will actually be provided in advance. Can we apply for backdated funds for 22-23? We're not intending to do that at the moment. The intention is that the approvals will be for after the investment plan's been approved. And the first come first served basis, that was in relation to the approval of the plans. So the UK government have said that they will consider the investment plans as they're submitted. So we can get ourselves at the start of that queue for assessment in terms of our investment plan, then hopefully we'll get a quick response back from UK government as to whether that investment plan is approved or not. And Vicky says she's switched on the cameras and microphones, so if anybody wants to put their camera on or unmute to ask any questions, that's fine. I'll just go through where are we at here. So multiply funds, I think Sheila Duncan was on the call. I don't know if you want to say anything, Sheila, in terms of what the intentions are for that fund and how that's been managed by Community Learning Development. Are you happy to say anything on that, Sheila, if you're still on the call? Just try to see if Sheila's actually still on the call or not. No, she's not been able to join, I don't think, by the looks of it. So I'll just go back to questions. So let's say the intention is that the multiply funding is being used to support basic skills and specifically focusing on numeracy and maths. So there is details within the intervention list as to what will be funded as part of that, but I'd say that's been managed by Community Learning Development, so there will be more coming out in due course as to what their intentions are for how they're going to deliver that programme in the future. I don't think there's an intention, particularly at the moment, in terms of a bidding process for Multiply, though I think Multiply is very much a set programme. I think there's a question there about what the fit would be with Multiply. What I would say is that there's not going to be that bidding process. It will be very much delivered by Community Learning Development, but there is also basic skills in terms of the intervention under the people and skills priority. So it may be that something you want to deliver fits with those interventions, and it may then complement the Multiply programme. And so we wouldn't want to fund anything through people and skills that would then duplicate Multiply, but it may complement it. So that may be something to consider. So hopefully that helps. I think there's a question there from Tony about management information system. So we've not heard from UK government yet how they plan to measure the outcomes and outputs, and whether there will be a specific management information system. Those of you that have been involved in structural funding before know that we have the lovely UMIS system to use for European structural funding just now, so I don't know if there will be a similar type system from the UK government, but it looks like they're saying it's going to be light touch. So we're hopeful in terms of evidence and requirements it will not be nearly as rigorous as what European structural funding was. You'll see the spreadsheet that's there, which has the kind of list of interventions, outcomes and outputs. So I would say that is probably the basic information in terms of the level of detail they want at this stage. Whether they want any more detail after that is not yet clear. We have been told there's going to be further guidance this summer, but whether there will be more detail at that stage as to how the evidence will be requested or required after funding, then there might be more detail there, but there's no guarantee of that. So at the moment it's not completely clear. So sorry, no, that's not a helpful answer. So dates in terms of when the assessment of bids will be done. So the closing date for submissions is the 11th of July. We've then given ourselves that window between the 11th of July and the 4th of August for the assessment panel to consider bids. Obviously, they need time to read all the bids, consider them as a panel, and then put that forward to the report that goes forward in August. So it will be between the 11th of July and the 4th of August we'll be assessing those bids and speaking to partners. Question about clarification around multiply. Yes, so I think what you're saying there is correct, Gemma. So basically, multiply is being led by Community Learning Development around about numeracy and maths, and within the people and skills intervention, there are different interventions there that complement the multiply programme. So it may be that something you want to deliver fits in with those interventions, and that would then complement multiply. So that's correct.
Gemma, we can put you in touch with our colleagues, and because I know that they are discussing with some external partners as well around developing a multiply response. So we can put you in touch with them to see what you're delivering or what you're proposing might fit it, how that might fit in with what their plans are.
Paul, I'm afraid the deadline is actually midday on the 11th of July to give us time to get bids out to the panel and give them time to read the application. So it's not 5 PM, it's 12 PM. Any other questions? I think they seem to have stopped now. As I say, if there are any other questions after this morning's session, then do feel free to email us in and we will do our best to answer any queries, or if we can't answer them, we'll try and get the answers from UK government. And hopefully Jessie has furiously been taking notes from all the questions that have come in this morning. We'll try to pull that together into a coherent question and answers, so that the kind of common questions that have been asked are pulled together and we put that up on the website as well. And as I say, as questions come in by email as well, we'll add to that if there's common questions that are coming in. So a question there from Nori about some of the material is read only. I'm not sure why that would be the case. It should be able to be edited. We've put the documents on as Microsoft Word documents. So and obviously the spreadsheets are Excel, so they should be able to be edited. So there shouldn't be any reason why it's read only. I think sometimes you get that little bit up the top that says enable editing, so it might be something to do with that when you open it. But they should be editable. So if there's not any other questions, I'd say hopefully this session this morning has been useful to answer some of those questions, and apologies again for the extremely short timescales, and I know this is slap bang in the middle of the start of holiday season as well, so apologies that it is such terrible timing, but we do want to make the most of this opportunity that's available from UK government. It's significant funding for Edinburgh, and we don't want the opportunity to pass us by, so we're going to try and manage the process and the timeline as best as we can. So really appreciate your help and support to achieve that timeline. So thank you for your input and contributions.
And Simon, yes, we will contact everyone regardless of whether it's successful, unsuccessful, or requiring some negotiation.
Great, thank you. Any other questions I've missed on there? So the question was, do you want proposals sent back as Word or PDF? Either is fine. If you want to save it as a PDF, that's okay. It's not an issue there.
Philip, I've just downloaded the documents from the website and I haven't had that issue, but if it is a wider issue, then if people could let us know and we'll look into it. Yeah,
that would be helpful. Thanks. I'm just trying to see, I think there's some questions that have just come up just now. Yep, so just a message there from Princess Trust to say that if anyone wants to partner with them for any delivery, then get in touch with Sarah. I think that's me covered all the questions. So as I say, thank you again for your contributions and questions this morning and for joining the call. The call has been recorded, so we'll hopefully work out a way how we can get that up onto the council website, but we'll definitely get the slides up there and the question and answers as soon as we can, so that can be shared with anybody that's not able to join the call this morning. And you'll see there's various folk in the call there who are happy to have collaborations, so do speak to your colleagues and get in touch in terms of putting it together joint applications. We're happy to consider consorting bids. Great, thank you everybody this morning.
Thanks everyone.